Hey, this is HK Perrin, and you're listening to Echoplex Media. Check out The Plex live every Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific on twitch.tv/Echoplex Media.
Police officers, they've gone insane.
I'm white, and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive for any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do this show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. And that's not going to be, we're not going to do it later anymore because I have these fancy new digs now where it's not so fucking hot. We are running on Wi-Fi tonight, everybody. So this is the wireless Dollar Tree. Anyway, you can support this project at echoplexmedia.com. Just click the support tab or go to eplex.store and pick up some merch. The bot will announce some discounts for you at some point during the show if I remember to set that up. I'm producer Dave, and you can find me on your grinder grid in the East Bay now.
And I am HK Perrin. You can find me on Mastodon at hperrin@port87.social. And you can also find me on email, hperrin@port87.com.
Fan-fucking-tastic. Well, we only missed 2 shows when we moved. We missed a bingo and an Operation Catterday. So that was fantastic. Although it was a goddamn hustle to get the Sunday show up. Look at this fabulous new lighting. Oh my God.
Yeah, it looks good.
Looks really good. It's a bisexual lighting is what the kids call it.
Choking a little bit. It just looks so good. I had to get all choked up about it.
Well, we're not here to talk about my lighting, though. We may spend some time talking about my lighting during the post game because I also have a new red light scheme, sort of. Anyway, we are going to cover another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. Let's hope he doesn't just start blurting out slurs like he did that one time.
Geez. Yeah. Oh my God.
But he has Chris Rufo on, and they're going to talk about the cultural shifts in America. This ought to be fucking fantastic.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Michael Shermer Show. This episode is brought to you by a new podcast I've just discovered called Everything Everywhere Daily. You can get it at any of your favorite podcast platforms. It's everywhere.
So don't listen to that podcast that Shermer's suggesting to you.
This is a great podcast because, as you know, I'm an autodidact and think you should be too. That is, we can teach ourselves by just constantly listening and learning to new content. Gary Arndt's, ARNDT podcast here, quit his job and now travels the world trying to answer short questions. Here are some of the episodes of his podcast. Emperor Claudius, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Europe versus the EU versus the Eurozone, questions and answers, Q&A, Chinese language, the mother of all demos, the rarest.
You know, it'd be great is if we had enough money that we could make Michael Shermer read an ad for the fucking Intellectual Dollar Tree on his show.
That would be awesome.
I'd be like, yeah, but
It'd
this
be a
looks
complete
like
waste of money.
This looks like a PayPal transfer for $1 million that I'm about to give you, friendo.
Sports, the history of the American flag, and so on. These are like just 10, 15 minutes, really nice clips. And these are just this month. Last month in June, Origin of Words and Phrases in Shakespeare. More than you ever really wanted to know about sewers, the anarchy, the Dome of the Rock, the Negro Leagues in baseball.
Careful there, Shermer.
The Cadaver Synod. And if we go back into May, there's another 31 episodes. In other words,
all right, whatever. Let's get to this infuriating content.
And give it a listen. It's a fun podcast. All right. Thanks for listening. Here's their episode. Just to remind you, I'm the publisher of Skeptic Magazine.
No hate to that
looks like
podcast.
this.
Just because you advertise on a shitty show doesn't mean you are a shitty show.
Q Magazine still in print.
I mean, it wasn't an ad for
You
gold.
can pick up at the local bookstore or online at skeptic.com. This was our special issue last year on race. We're going to be talking about critical race theory today with my guest, Christopher Rufo. He's a writer, filmmaker, and activist. He's directed 4 documentaries for PBS, including America Lost, which tells the story of 3 forgotten American cities. He is a senior fellow of the Manhattan Institute and an editor of the public policy magazine City Journal. His reporting and activism have inspired a presidential order, a national grassroots movement, and legislation in 22 states. Christopher holds a Bachelor's of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown University and a Master's of Liberal Arts from Harvard University. He lives in the Pacific Northwest with his wife and 3 sons, and his new book, his first book, as far as I know, America's Cultural Revolution. We'll be releasing this on the pub date of the book, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. Christopher, nice to see you.
It's good.
Yep, we sure did. We conquered everything. That's why we have everything that we want.
A little bit about your background. I didn't know that much about you, other than your activism. You're all over the place. So I was
Well, this is a problem that reoccurs with Shermer. He doesn't know much about the person he's talking to.
quite surprised by the book.
He doesn't have, I mean, I guess he's a
deeply
professor.
researched.
So.
It's a true scholarly work. I had no idea that this was in your background. I didn't really do my homework on that. 47 pages of endnotes. So yeah, this is not just some light activist manifesto thrown out there for debate. You took this really seriously. What's your background? What led you to be able to do this kind of work?
Yeah, so my professional background is in documentary filmmaking, and it's kind of very interesting. Looking at doing a documentary, what you're really doing is getting out into the field, talking to people, conducting interviews, observing phenomena out in the wild. And so this is actually quite different. The book writing process, as you said, this is actually my first book, was totally different. It was in the stacks, in the archives, finding letters and other materials, finding original sources, spending a lot of time, pouring through mostly written work and then some audiovisual material, and then assembling it into a story through the written word. And so for me, it was actually a lot of fun. And at the beginning, it was this mountain of evidence that I had some folks helping me sort through. But then fundamentally, I hope what I was able to do with the book is bring a narrative kind of talent, or kind of my narrative training and documentary. You're telling stories that engage people, move people at an emotional level. I didn't want this to be a kind of dry book, although it is deeply researched. I wanted it to be something that kind of gets especially for conservative audiences, gets the story that they might have had bits and pieces of into one coherent narrative.
So it's propaganda. I mean, that's fine. I'm a fucking propagandist. So are you. One night a week.
Yeah, it's definitely propaganda.
Right. Well, you did that. I thought it's a highly readable book. I listened to the audio edition, which is nice. I always do that. And
It's highly readable. I
is a
didn't
good,
read it.
captivating story.
Highly readable. I listened to it. I know that's a fucking weird thing to nitpick, right? But my God, I enjoyed listening to it. Would have been fine,
You are
Shermer.
doing a history of ideas, which is one of my areas. And one of the difficulties is drawing causal connections between thinkers across generations or decades or even centuries. How did you do that, short of somebody saying, as as Foucault taught us, or as Derrida said, as Marx showed us, something like that, where they actually quote the person. How do you know that these people, say, in the 60s influenced modern critical race theorists?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of it is looking for explicit connections that are made by people. So, for example, I profile Angela Davis, who I think is really the kind of godmother or really the originating figure of critical race theory. She tied the original kind of critical theory from the early part of the 20th century to American race politics in a deliberate way. Of course, her thesis advisor was the critical theorist Herbert Marcuse, who's also profiled in the book. And then Angela Davis, what is her connection with, say, the modern BLM movement? Well, she gets these massive spreads in the New York Times Magazine. She is the personal...
Is that what the New York Times is a BLM publication? She got like a spread in the New York Times Magazine, and this is how she... I mean, I know he's going to continue here, but this is weird.
To a number of BLM's leaders. And then, for example, the critical race theorists specifically not only take a lot of her concepts and language, but even credit her with the influence. And so I tried not to make any specious connections. I wanted the connections to be not only verifiable through the reporting, through the research, but I wanted to really be charitable to my subjects. And I wanted to see the world first through their eyes, treat them fairly, treat them as serious thinkers and activists and writers, and then also then layer on my criticism or my critique or embedding them in my own narrative. And I'll tell you, one of the things, and I think this sets it apart from a lot of conservative books, is that over the time, even though I really vehemently disagree with a lot of the ideas from Herbert Marcuse, Paulo Freire, Derek Bell, Angela Davis, over the time of researching them, reading them, understanding their biographies, I developed a kind of appreciation for them, a respect for them. And I hope that comes through in the book. It's not merely saying, look at these awful people and their ideas are ruining the country. It's actually saying, let's treat them as human beings. Let's treat them as...
Did he say it's not merely saying that?
Right, yeah.
So it is saying that.
Probably in one way or another, it certainly is. That's funny, though, because if you look at this guy's Twitter presence and like sort of his presence as a media figure, he has been like clearly like just doing culture war shit and trying to like fan the flames of people's fears of critical race theory, and to a lesser extent than other people. And maybe he just isn't, maybe he just hasn't gotten there yet, or it's not something he's focusing on, to a lesser extent, like queer theory and queerness. And so it's really interesting that he's on the Shermer show trying to act like he's something other than just a culture war propagandist. I mean, that'd be like me going on some show and trying to pretend that I'm like, that we do some kind of academic work here or something. Like, yo, dude, it's really weird. Like when people go try to hide the ball for like specific audiences.
I mean, it's Michael Shermer's show. It's not really like something important.
And let's try to understand them as people, even if, ultimately I come down on the other side of them politically.
Yeah, I think you did that quite well. In fact, there was far less criticism than I expected, given, again, what we see you on TV saying in sound bites.
I forget, is he the one who said on Twitter, like, we've successfully branded, or like, we've successfully destroyed the meaning of critical race theory, and now we can just brand whatever we want with it?
I mean, not in so many words, but something along those lines, that the goal here is to, make a boogeyman out of critical race theory, and then brand like any kind of movement for social justice or for civil rights as critical race theory. Yeah, it's sort of a combination of what you said and then what I just said there. But I mean, whatever. His audience, it's not like his audience cares, right? They're like, okay, good.
Yeah, true.
You don't really do that in this book so much, which is refreshing. And yeah, it's a conservative book, or you're a conservative or whatever. I don't know. I didn't really get that much, which I think is good. I mean, I know you're conservative, but why aren't liberals concerned about some of these ideas? So maybe let's start with a distinction between sort of old school liberals like me, I guess, Steve Pinker, maybe Biden, I don't know, and these more radical progressive
old school liberals. So like the problem with like what was liberal like in the 50s and the 60s is now conservative generally. Like time marches on, and like, you know, Martin Luther King said the arc of history something and it bends towards justice, and that generally tends to be like a more progressive view. And also, like, not for nothing, that's just like social stuff. I think economically, since the 50s or 60s, this country has gone the other way. It's become more conservative, more capitalist, more
absolutely,
more intensely capitalist. So
more economically laissez-faire.
More deregulation, less unions, that kind of stuff. But they're not on here.
Like there was a time where AT&T was too big and we broke them up. And now you look at companies like fucking Google. They own the search engine market. They own the browser market, not quite as much as Microsoft did. But like, I think Chrome's market share is something like 60% or
right,
65%.
But they're not going to talk about any of this stuff. I was just bringing up that, like, when they say that, like, you know, that the liberals have captured everything, they're leaving out money. Basically, they're leaving out economic policy. That's all.
Yeah, but also I think what a lot of these people mean when they say, like, oh, I'm a classical liberal or I'm an old school liberal, you know, whenever they say those kind of things, I think what they mean to say is, I'm a conservative. I just don't want to have to call myself a conservative. Right.
Well, I mean, and Shermer's been on the record in the past as being a libertarian. So
a libertarian is
it's
pretty damn close to a conservative.
It's a Republican with a bong. I understand.
Whatever terms we want to use that seem much further out on the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think what we've seen, certainly since 2020, this process has accelerated, is a lot of the old line liberals, classical liberals, center-left moderates have found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They might not agree with the kind of Republican Party, conservative politics, conservative
Yes, the
movement,
boomers grew up and realized that they're conservatives. Like, you know, a lot of boomers changed their views because they're good people. But a lot of boomers are stuck with the views that their parents shared with them when they were 13. So
left moderates have found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They might not agree with the kind of Republican Party, conservative politics, conservative movement, ideology, but they found themselves quite estranged also from their kind of colleagues in some cases on the far left. And so you had this wrestling within the left, and you've seen many people, including our mutual friend Peter Boghossian, people in that mold, find themselves actually more aligned with conservatives, certainly the kind of center-right conservatives. And this is, in some sense, a battle within liberalism as well. In a different era, I might be a small L liberal, but in this era, I think it's kind of easier to describe myself as a conservative. But you have people that are anti.
Basically, if I could translate what he's saying here, basically he's saying, when I grew up, I thought everyone else would stay racist, but they stopped being racist, and I kept being racist, and now I'm upset about that.
Maybe not. I mean, it's not just, I think that his focus is like on education and not teaching about racism. I don't think that, he doesn't really say about a bunch of racist or bigoted shit like James Lindsay does, like on the internet. He just complains about being taught about race in education. It's a different kind of dumb fuckery.
I would say you don't have to say anything overtly racist to be clearly a racist.
Herbert Marcuse, the critical theorist who's the kind of anchor biographical portrait in the book, is explicitly anti-liberal. Angela Davis, explicitly anti-liberal. Paulo Freire, explicitly anti-liberal. And Derek Bell, the father of critical race theory, their whole movement is explicitly, in their own writings, deeply anti-liberal, It's against the concept of individual rights, private property, Enlightenment values. And so I hope that this can also speak to some of those estranged liberals. And
when they talk about the Enlightenment values, the Enlightenment happened a long time ago, and it wasn't all that enlightened by today's standards. Like, the Enlightenment happened while there was still like chattel slavery in a lot of the world. It wasn't, by today's standards, not very enlightened times.
To them, how the movement that has really taken over the institutional left in the United States has deviated from that small L liberal tradition and really originates from something much more radical, revolutionary, Marxist in nature. And I'm trying to give people
Marxist
a sense of
in nature.
Where do these ideas come from? A lot of even New York Times readers.
Are there a lot of Marxists in the United States?
Obviously not a lot of self-described Marxists. There's probably a lot in my chat, but they put up with me. But I think like he's trying to suggest that every one of these people that he's speaking about, every one of these academics or like public figures that he's speaking about is a Marxist, because I don't know. I've never seen him connect those dots, actually. You can be an anti-capitalist without necessarily being a Marxist, or you can have critiques of capitalism and still be a capitalist. So I don't think he ever like really solidly makes the case. He just wants to paint social justice movements and I guess what our friend Jordy Pete would call postmodernism. He wants to paint that all like as Marxist, even though it's not. They're not necessarily. Marxism is not necessary for any of those belief systems.
2020. What's happening with all of our institutions? What's happening in the streets? What's happening with, academia? And I hope that this book can answer that question for people, to say, this is what you've experienced, and then I've gone to great lengths to uncover, the roots and the origins of our really modern, kind of revolutionary fervor over the last few years.
Okay, so you highlight, let's look at the people you highlight here. Herbert Marcuse, Angela Davis, Paulo Freire, and Derek Bell. And for good measure, Eldridge Cleaver, Huey Newton, Black Panthers, and so on. So before we get into their philosophies, what are their influencers? I guess probably Marx you'd start with?
Well, of course, it has to be Marx, right?
Yeah. It depends. Certainly, Herbert Marcuse in the early part of his career was an orthodox Marxist. Over the course of the 20th century, as he saw what was happening specifically in the Soviet Union, deviated from orthodox Marxism and became more infatuated with the new left at the time, the more activist 1960s youth movement, racial unrest. He did not think at the end of his career that the Marxist revolution would originate in the working class. He thought the working class was not only non-revolutionary, but anti-revolutionary. Angela Davis was, of course, literally a card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA. She ran for vice president of the United States under the flag of the Communist Party. So she was deeply influenced by Marx, although she had...
Like when they say card-carrying, like that they just hand out cards. They hand out your communist card. It's so weird.
Yep, it's colored red.
Graduate thesis on Kant, and so she was well versed in the the Western philosophical tradition, Kant, Hegel, Marx, specifically German philosophers, and then she took them into the context of the United States and some of the left-wing radical movements and black radical movements. Paulo Freire, same thing. He was working with Marxist, Leninist revolutionaries in the Third World. Certainly, Marx was a huge influence. His idea of critical consciousness originates in some of those Marxist categories that he had learned while he was a student in Brazil. But the most interesting case is actually...
But the thing is, one of the things that they do in this is they're like, oh, well, somebody learned about Marx and Marxist philosophy when they were studying political science or political philosophy, and that means they're a Marxist. And it's like, well, you learn about all kind of things, and you don't have to... Like, if you you take philosophy or like political science or whatever, you're going to learn about all different kinds of schools of thought. And that doesn't mean that you are like an adherent to every school of thought you've ever learned about, because that would get real complicated after a while. You're like, I'm a libertarian, colonialist, Marxist, critical theorist. Like, that just gets super complicated. You can't possibly just say that because somebody learned about something that's necessarily their school of thought. That's stupid. That's fucking very stupid and very dishonest.
And even if it is, like, there's nothing wrong with Karl Marx's philosophy.
That too.
Derek Bell. We've talked a lot about critical race theory over the last few years in the American public debate, but it's kind of interesting, actually, but very little discussion about Derek Bell, who was the Harvard law professor, who was the inspirational figure, the founding figure in some ways of critical race theory. His students at Harvard Law and other elite law schools around the country, kind of inspired by Bell, established the discipline of critical race theory in the late 1980s. But Derek Bell was not a Marxist. He says actually in some letters and other personal correspondence, I've been too busy to read Marx. I haven't really read the original material. Maybe I'm a left-winger, but not in the sense that he was a pedigreed intellectual.
Like, Mike, what do you mean? The dude was a pedigreed, like, this dude was an academic. He didn't read Marx, though, so he's clearly not a pedigreed intellectual. This guy's, like, saying, like, what do you mean? I thought it was bad to be a Marxist. Now you have to be a Marxist? Like, what the fuck? Or now you have to
he's just explaining that, not everyone he cited as a Marxist, but we can extrapolate because 3 out of the 4 people he cited were Marxists. That means 75% of people on the left in the United States are Marxists.
And I bet we could get him saying that Derek Bell is a Marxist, like, somewhere else, right? We'd probably find him saying that anyway.
His course is actually very different, and I think really important. Derek Bell, as a young man, grew up in the Pittsburgh area, came of age in Pittsburgh, served in the Air Force, went to law school, was a very successful student, really a brilliant student. You can sense his brilliance in his writing. And then he became a lawyer for the NAACP, doing cases in the deep South, desegregating schools in places like Mississippi. I think he oversaw something like 300 school desegregation cases. And so he was a civil rights activist, a small L liberal at the time. But Bell became disillusioned with the civil rights movement, with small L liberalism, with even the desegregation movement. As history progressed into the late 50s and early 60s, his views really shifted. And he became utterly disillusioned with the Martin Luther King style civil rights activism, appealing to the Constitution, appealing to the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, appealing to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He became a kind of very bitter critic of a lot of these institutions that are still revered on the mainstream part of the left. And his cynicism towards the end, was saying, the Constitution, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil Rights Act are all illusions. They're providing the appearance of freedom, but they're actually used to very secretly and covertly reinforce the structures of racial domination. And so
they're not even providing the appearance of freedom, though. Like the amendment that banned slavery has a huge carve out in it that says, actually, you can own slaves, but only if they're convicted of a crime.
Well, that's the government like forcing you to do labor in prison. Yeah, there's still forced labor. You're if you're in prison, I wouldn't call that being enslaved, because most people do have a release date. But I do. Yeah, there were carve outs for forced labor, particularly for people who were convicted of crimes. And unfortunately, they probably were also at the same time inventing new crimes that would generally only apply to fucking black folk at the time. So, I mean, that's not funny. I don't know why I was laughing while I said that, but new situations demand innovation, and you got to find new ways to oppress people.
So the text of the amendment, the 13th Amendment, is neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
In other words, slavery is not okay except sometimes.
Forced labor in prison is pretty bad, but it's not chattel slavery. Chattel slavery tends not to
Correct.
come with a release date.
Yes, that is correct. But what I mean to say is, like, even the Constitution doesn't really try to make like a doesn't really try to pretend to guarantee freedom.
He's the most interesting figure because he's not simply a kind of mid 20th century communist like an Angela Davis or a Paulo Freire, which, you know, in some ways they can be dismissed.
Wait, why do you dismiss them just because they're a mid 20th century communist? Isn't that the ad hominem fallacy?
I think it's the genetic fallacy.
No, I think it's the you are this, therefore you're wrong. That's the ad hominem fallacy.
Well, I think it's this argument is wrong because of who it comes from.
Yes,
I guess
and
one is both the same.
We're not going to get down in the weeds in this. This is the ad hominem fallacy, not just an insult, right? This argument is wrong because it comes from a communist. Even if the argument is, 6 squared is 36, well, we can just dismiss them. They're a communist.
Historical progression of communism. Very few people believe in the orthodox Marxist, Leninist point of view. But Derek Bell's critique survives and actually is really, I think, the foundation of what we see as critical race theory, of course, but a lot of our discourse on race, certainly in the academic sphere, comes from Derek Bell.
Interesting, yes. I'm always amazed anyone cites Marx anymore, given the outcome of the last century of trying out his ideas in real-world countries. But I guess the response to that is,
to my knowledge, his ideas have never actually been tried out.
Well, that's the no true Marxist fallacy. I mean, like communism, as it's been tried to, as humans have tried to implement it, and just like any other system, once there's a consolidation of power, the consolidation of power tends to lead toward authoritarianism. It's not like a property of Marxism. It's a property of humans.
But it's just like there's never been true capitalism either.
Although Peter Thiel did try to make that island.
What a hellhole that would have been.
Communism or whatever, something like that. But, if you go back to like Hegel and the influencers on Marx in that kind of German romanticism, there's this almost sense of like a force of history that's separate from human action. Almost like it's in the ether somewhere that the dialectic, the thesis, the antithesis, and then this is going to happen, the march of time in which these stages will unfold in a certain way. And there is no such thing. There is no force of history. It's just people doing stuff. And so I guess the closest you would come to that would be culture. Maybe culture underlies the actions that people make through the ideas that are filtered through culture. Something like that, maybe.
Andrew Breitbart was a giant piece of shit, but he said that politics is downstream from culture, and that's right. It is correct. He was just a massive piece of shit. But culture is important. It is the culture. It's literally just everyone. Yes, good job, Shermer.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the evolution on the left. They had to come up with a way to explain why Marxism failed everywhere, every time it had been tried. And my sense, though, is that
have you come up with a reason why capitalism has failed every time it's been tried?
You could no longer believe.
Like I said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And anybody gets too much fucking power, they're just going to be shitty and corrupt. No. Also, like someone in chat said, in South America, a lot of the times that it was like leftist or socialist that it failed, it was there's a little organization called the CIA.
Yeah, that's true.
Materialism,
yep.
Meaning that
I'm meddling in that
conflict
shit.
Of economic forces determines the course of history and will eventually yield a kind of classless utopia. I don't think anyone really on the left believes that. You see kind of some strange people at the fringes still believing in that dialectic, but
Believing in that
what
dialectic.
they've done since, starting with the new
Ooh,
left in
Shermer can't even get a mug with his logo on it. He should sign up for Fourth Wall.
the 1960s and continuing to today, is say, well, we need to inhabit the institutions of culture. We need to shape beliefs and attitudes. And so you have things like DEI, which is not saying we need to create a classless society or redistribute resources. It's saying we need to adjust psychological perceptions. We need to reinforce the self-esteem of marginalized groups and
No. The DEI in the corporate sphere is we need to go ahead and not get sued if we fire somebody and they think that maybe they were fired because we are bigots. So we need to check this box. That's what our lawyers say. That's what DEI is. It's lawyers. Cover your. It's could also be called CYA for cover your ass.
Dominant groups, create sense of guilt and shame, and manipulate those emotions through social science in order to achieve the desired racial attitude.
If someone says to you, "Hey, you benefit from, institutionalized racism," and your response is, "Oh, I feel like you're making me feel guilty. Stop teaching that. It must be wrong." What does that say about your argument? That anything that makes you feel guilty must be wrong?
Yeah.
That's not an argument to say that it's not true. That's just an argument that it makes you uncomfortable.
It's an argument almost for a safe space.
Yeah.
In a way. And there's nothing wrong with creating safe spaces for people to discuss things. It's just that the part of our culture that these two have been so deeply involved in was freaking out about that shit for several years. They kind of stopped talking about it because now they're the ones asking for it. But
yep.
But this is really historically, if you look at it over the long term, a kind of consolation prize for the left. Running people through HR training is not the grand vision of overthrowing the U.S. government that someone like Eldridge Cleaver had in 1968.
We're going to overthrow. No, you have no shit, buddy. The HR department's not going to overthrow the government. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. I'm glad you hooked us up with that fucking very important knowledge.
And the HR department is a consequence of a specific law that says you can't fire someone for certain reasons.
I mean, HR
you can't fire someone because they're a woman. You can't fire someone because they're a Christian. You can't fire someone because they're German.
And I mean, HR does all kinds of other stuff in larger organizations. They handle payroll and stuff. But HR is largely, like you were saying, a legal cover your ass part of the company.
But if he's saying that okay, that purpose of HR is a bad purpose, I think what he's saying is you should be able to fire someone because they're German, right? You find out that this person that you work with is German, you should be able to fire them. Isn't that what he's saying?
I mean, I don't know. I've never worked with an openly German person before. So I don't, because he didn't say that. That's the thing is I wouldn't say that that's what he's saying. His argument, I think, against diversity, equity, and inclusion programs is I guess he just thinks that it's bad to try to have those as goals for your company. Be the reason that you truly kind of believe in that and you think that would benefit your company, or be it that you're just covering your own ass because it's illegal to discriminate in hiring and discriminate in firing and discriminate in who you promote and whatever. I think he's basically saying that whichever one that is, it's bad, but he's sort of not saying why, which is convenient because then that leaves it up to his viewer or his audience or Michael Shermer's audience to fill in the blank about why. And a lot of those people are going to fill in the blank in the way that you're describing, I think.
Yep.
Pernicious.
And that's clearly that's the way he intends it. He's not going to come out and say it, but
because culture is important. It affects people's daily life. It affects how they live.
The world around you affects your daily life. Good job, genius.
Work, how they raise their kids, what kind of education system they have. And so I think just because they have lowered their sights in some sense, activists on the left still have an enormous power and control over our institutions that impact human life. And I'm not a believer in, of course, dialectical materialism or the kind of Hegelian historicist progression. But at the same time, those of us in the, let's say, the classical liberal tradition or the conservative tradition, or really the tradition of the American principles, still have to grapple with that ideology, because the founders believed in universal principles. They believed in a constant state of human nature, and they believed in a Lockean liberalism that said that there are certain fundamental precepts of reality to which we need to conform. And so I still believe in that, this kind of Aristotelian idea of human nature, of the forms of regimes. Of course,
I'm like skeptical of anybody who says that human nature is this, that, or the other thing, because I think that he's talking about culture, and I think that culture has a pretty big impact on how we behave, what we believe, what we do, like who we associate with, what kinds of things offend us. And I'm not sure that there's this just sort of almost like invisible hand of human nature that is acting in as powerful a way as a lot of these people would have us believe. I think that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like outside of like needing, like getting hungry and food and water and like the desire for shelter, those kinds of things, sure, that's human nature. But you start getting too far away from that stuff, like you start getting outside of that on the hierarchy of needs, it starts becoming too malleable, and then like it's no longer human nature. It's just like what you think humans are or how they should be, and that's a different. That's philosophical. That's just a belief system.
Maybe you could boil it down to like greed.
Maybe, sure.
In a kind of democratic republic as our government, as our form of government, and then also the virtues and the cultural left. Really, their greatest success is demolishing all sense of classical virtue, not only from our public discourse, but especially from
Did
our
we
education.
do that?
That's great.
Yo, that's awesome.
I don't even know what the fuck he means when he says classical virtue, but we're talking about whatever.
Me neither, but that sounds really cool. I'm glad we did that.
If he's
it's
talking
the first
about
I've heard of it.
He's talking about whatever people thought was virtuous in the late 1700s, and we destroyed that. Well, bravo us, I suppose.
Awesome.
Shit was pretty fucked up
give
back
ourselves
then.
a hand.
Yeah, a couple thoughts there. I think there's this push to find deep root causes of specific events. How come there was that shooting in Chicago this weekend on that street corner? Well, it's poverty, or it's broken homes, or it's this and that. How about it's that guy right there? That's the problem, that guy.
But that's the stupid analysis. Yes, of course, the shooter is the problem. That's why we have like a legal system that fucking endeavors to catch and imprison the shooter. But if we just stop there, then I guess there's just still going to be shootings, and we can't if we don't address the root causes of something, it's like this is like only addressing a symptom in this case.
Like, imagine if the FAA like looked at a plane crash and was like, oh, well, clearly the problem was this plane. So I guess, everyone else, don't worry about it. It was just this plane.
And luckily it's in a bazillion pieces now. So they wouldn't like check, hey, is there something wrong with this type of plane?
Yeah. Or maybe something we're doing in maintenance. Maybe we should be checking something. There was a pretty famous plane crash where there was this I don't know how to put it. It was like a screw thing that controlled like one of the control surfaces of the aircraft. It was like in the tail of the aircraft, and I think it controlled like the up and down control surface on the tail. And it broke in this plane, and the unfortunately everyone died in the crash, but the pilots weren't able to control the plane after that broke. And then they found out that every other plane in the fleet, like the reason that thing broke was because it wasn't lubed. And like every other plane in this company's fleet also had like not even nearly enough lube on that piece because they just weren't doing that.
But now the problem is that's like critical plane theory. And like we shouldn't be engaging in that.
Well, like imagine if we all had this mentality of like, oh, well, the problem was just that one thing. Like that's stupid. The problem can be systemic. It doesn't have to be systemic, but it can be. And if the problem is like cops are killing black people at a way higher rate than white people, that is a systemic thing. That is not a, oh, well, I guess it was just, a few hundred black people every year.
And it's a little bit like your
like specifically those people. No, the problem is the cops.
Makes this point about this is an older article she wrote about drunken keggers at college campuses, in which these guys are doing what guys do when they're 18 and everybody's drunk at a party. And
what is that, Shermer? What is it that the drunk guys at a party at a fraternity do when they're 18? Shermer, go on.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
Go on, Shermer.
Is he a rape apologist?
Oh, I don't know. That's why I asked what he means. Maybe he'll tell us, but otherwise we'll have to assume.
The response is, oh, it's the patriarchy. and Heather says, I can assure you, these guys are not thinking about the patriarchy when they're sitting there at these parties. But there is that push, like, I can't do anything about that guy on the street corner, but I could do my little share to reduce systemic racism or the patriarchy or whatever by raising my children in some particular way or acting differently when I interact with people. Or politically, if you're the mayor or governor or president, well, I got to do something. We got to pass legislation. We're gonna allocate affirmative action or some finances for schools or something like this because that feels like I'm going to do something, even though it doesn't have any effect on that one particular person right there.
Well, because that already happened.
The thing is, though, it does. Like legislation fucking works.
Well, but it doesn't undo the thing that already happened, HK, because it's not a time machine. So,
okay, yes, it won't bring back someone from the dead, but legislation works. Like clearly legislation works. Every time there's a significant problem and we have legislation to fix, not every time, obviously, but a lot of times when the legislation is good, it fixes the problem. Like, for example, we had a hole in the ozone layer, right? And we decided that we're just going to outlaw the thing that is causing the hole in the ozone layer. Did these companies become outlaw companies and still include these, what are they called, CFCs in their aerosol spray? No, they just switched to something else because it was illegal. And that fixed the hole in the ozone layer.
Well, it allowed for the process of the ozone layer to sort of repair itself. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is the quite possibly the dumbest thing I've ever heard Michael Shermer say.
That's right. And it's amazing.
That's a very high bar to cross.
They actually have, and policymakers, individual citizens, the society as a whole can do things like, well, we're gonna enforce the limits on keggers and college parties, or we're gonna enforce low-level street crimes to try to get guns off the street and try to deter more violent crimes. I mean, we know that we have actually
what's a great and actually effective way to get guns off the street? Gun buyback programs.
Sure. But this guy wants broken windows policing, I think. Or maybe he's arguing against it. It's hard to tell.
On creating restrictions, limits, prohibitions on some of those expressions of behavior that are very concrete, very tangible, even if in some cases are somewhat minor. But our friends in government on the left say, well, no, we're not going to do the thing that we actually could have a significant and immediate impact on. We're going to go after, 1619 and the first arrival of African slaves in North America. And it's like, well, yes, that is something of certainly historical importance, scholarly relevance, and should even be part of the public debate. I think 1619 Project is certainly a thesis that is worthy of debate. But what do you do with that?
Okay.
I mean,
But I don't think anybody's suggesting that this history lesson is going to solve crime in cities.
Yes, the two are not related.
I mean,
They might be related, but they're not directly related, and no one is proposing that the way we should tackle like gun violence on the streets is the 1619 project. Like, no one has ever said that.
it could be a piece of a broader long-term plan to like make people more aware of what's going on in the world and possibly more inclined to pressure lawmakers to address certain inequalities. But that's like that's a fucking 100-year project or something. That's not, we're on a 4-year political cycle here, buddy.
short of having a time traveling machine, you can't change the last 400 years of history. And then you can't really show any relevance to today beyond a very broad and metaphorical interpretation of current events. And so, I'm certainly with Heather McDonald, my Manhattan Institute colleague, with the broken windows idea, not only on policing, but other aspects of governance.
So he is for broken windows policing. That shit doesn't work though, and it targets who it targets. Like
He doesn't care.
Broken windows policing, like they're not going to go like stop and frisking people like stockbrokers in the fucking financial district who might very well have some fucking cocaine, but they're going to certainly stop and frisk certain people in certain neighborhoods, and like that. So that doesn't really, you're not really doing anything except like criminalizing communities when you engage in broken windows policing.
And they're not going to tackle the number one form of theft in the United States through broken windows policing, which is wage theft.
Because when you go back and you look at the civil rights movement, against which Derek Bell rebelled later in his life, you had, for the most part, in my reading, people who wanted to, kind of cash the deposit of the Declaration or the promissory note of the Declaration of Independence. They wanted to conform to not only the system of individual rights in the United States as a form of law, but also conform to middle class or bourgeois values as a matter of culture. And so you look at these great protests that actually my mentor, Bruce Chapman, attended when he was a young man in the 1960s. On the Washington Monument, the civil rights marches, the very famous pictures. People are dressed in suit and tie. People look kind of immaculately dressed. These aren't necessarily wealthy people. These are working class people, many working class African Americans. But the image that they convey is one of immense dignity, of immense self-respect.
Because they understood optics, dude. They understood optics. That's all.
And a kind of immense hope for equal participation in American society. I'm still really moved and struck by some of those images. Then compare that to the kind of Antifa or BLM activists in 2020.
Yeah, they were out there in jeans and nobody was wearing a fucking Armani suit out there. Fuck them.
You know what? Those protests happened in the summer in 2020.
Yeah, the suit. They mostly happened at night, but still, a suit and a tie. Come on, you gotta wear some sensible shoes out there. You gotta be ready to run from the police.
It would be pretty fucking hot to go out there with a suit and tie. Like, climate change has not been insubstantial. Like, it is much hotter in the summers than it used to be.
And just like the other thing is like, he's comparing like a highly organized, he's talking about the March on Washington, which was like a highly organized event. And he's comparing that with like spontaneously organized street protests. Spontaneously organized street protests, whatever you're wearing now, you're in the protest. Like, you didn't plan for months or whatever. It's, you didn't get a permit. You didn't know for 6 weeks or a month or whatever before that you were going to go, that kind of stuff. So yeah, people are just going to walk out their door and go. So it's like, it's apples and oranges in that way. And also just like times change. People just tend to dress more casually now anyway.
Yeah, it's fashion. But, Chris Rufo, I guess, is the fashion police.
you have really deranged looking, mugshots of people. You have people that look just visually quite disordered, and then committing, sprees of violence in the name of what? It was never quite clear what they wanted beyond defunding the police or just.
Is that not a bad thing? Like,
and so
is that not enough? I mean,
well, and he also just he's like caricaturing this in a pretty dishonest way, because some of these organizations had listed demands and some of the people were just out there because they was pissed.
I mean, should there be more than defund the police? Defunding the police is a good thing.
Like I said, I think a lot of people were just out there because they were mad, and they weren't necessarily, they didn't get mad and then all of a sudden create a list of demands. You know what I'm saying? That's not how any of this works.
Yeah. And also, depending on how you ask it, most people in the US, like a majority of the people in the US, are for defunding the police. But you can't ask, are you for defunding the police? Because they'll say no. But if you ask, like, are you for reallocating funds that currently go to the police to more social services to help those that are in need of those social services that would otherwise call the police under the current system, they say yes. But that doesn't fit on a sign.
Absolutely not.
Those two images, if you look at them side by side, I think reveal the kind of fundamentally changed nature of the modern left, and one that even my friends in the center or on the kind of classical left, I think, need to grapple with and should be deeply uncomfortable with. And they should ask, by reading the book, say, wow, where has our movement gone? Where did it go so far off the rails, and what can we do?
This is just a kids these days argument. Right? This is like, oh, in my day. Well, it's like, well, it's not your day anymore.
Corrected.
Yeah. I often wonder how many people actually believe the rhetoric or the ideas. Certainly the characters you write about, they believed it. They were hardcore theorists about it. But how many of their followers believed it? How much of the general public really bought into it? It's the same question for today. The DEI program. Everybody I know that has to take these HR training programs, including me, and I rant about this all the time about how idiotic they are. My example is, you hear an off-color joke about sex or race or whatever, and you should A, repeat the joke and tell all your friends, B, intervene and explain why telling jokes like that is inappropriate, or C, contact HR. The answer is always contact HR. My president.
No,
depends.
It's not actually.
Yeah, it depends if you're that person's immediate supervisor. You'd be like, maybe not right away, but you go, hey, I need to see you in my office.
But I mean, like, on purpose, the answer to those questions is not always contact HR. Because like, if you just run through it and always click contact HR, it'll tell you, like, no, that's wrong. You should actually do this.
Right. And this is all like, he's like caricaturing it again. And like, so you have to go to some fucking meeting you don't want to go to at work. Like, I don't care. Like, people have to do shit they don't want to do at work all the time. Like, what? Like, oh no, poor Michael Shermer has to go to some fucking sensitivity training. Well, somebody that works in customer service is getting screamed at by some lady because there were too many pickles on the hamburger. So like, you gotta put up with shit. You gotta put up with shit you don't like at work. I don't know what to tell these people.
Yeah, man. I said, come on, what are we doing this for? And he said, well, it's kind of a practical legal thing. If you do something and we get sued, we can say, hey, look, Shermer took the course right there, October 17th. There it is in the computer.
Yes.
Our hands are clean. So I do wonder if it's...
Yeah, exactly.
What extent it's kind of practical.
Yeah, to cover your ass.
Yes, it's not something that the left is pushing. It's these companies not wanting to get sued. The left has never said we need to give DEI training to everyone. Like, we've never... Like, we on the left. That's never been a popular position on the left.
Right.
Like, that came about because these companies were like, oh, all these laws that are being passed about, like, sexually harassing your coworkers and, like, firing people for being a member of a protected class. Like, we ought to tell our employees that that's not cool so we don't get sued.
Right. And it's, there's all kinds of other things that people do at companies that they sort of need to take classes for. Like, forklift certification came about because people were probably for the same reason. People were getting hurt by either as the forklift driver or because the forklift driver wasn't properly trained. And now to cover your ass as a company, you make sure anybody driving that forklift is forklift certified. Like, I don't see how this is very, very different. Like Shermer is a professor because he is, had the training to be a professor. This is just ongoing training for his work. And especially because he's not just dealing with customers, he's dealing with students. And so like the power that he has over these students is pretty great. And so, yeah, of course you send him to something like this. And yeah, some of it's probably pretty fucking cringe, but so the fuck what? Like, fucking suck it up. Tough it out, friendo. Like I don't know what else, like how long could this have possibly been? Right? How much time could he have possibly had to spend doing this? And he was on the clock. He might be salaried or whatever, but it was like during his work day where he would have otherwise been at work anyway. So what the fuck? I can't
imagine it was any more than 1 hour of his time.
I mean, it could have been
like the ones that I took were like half an hour. So like, let's say he had an extremely long one. That's still an hour.
Right. And you just fucking, if you're cool and you're not fucking with anybody, you just go there and you absorb the material. Maybe you learn something new, and maybe you don't. And if you're an asshole, then you complain about it.
Yep.
Disney does its thing. How many of Disney employees believe it? Or they just go along with it? Or the spiral of silence?
Believe
they're
what?
afraid to say anything, and it's only a few people. I just really don't know.
I
believe what?
The stuff in the DEI training.
I would assume all of them.
Well, I would.
If I found out that one of my employees thought, oh, well, I should be allowed to tell sexist jokes at work, but I'm not because of this DEI training, I'd be like, oh, cool. Well, you're fired.
Even if they're not telling the joke, I don't know. But I do understand.
Yeah, even if they're not telling the jokes, that's not cool. You shouldn't believe that.
And because it's going to happen, right? If they're of that mindset, you have reason to believe that in the future that's going to happen.
Like, not just if you do it, but if you think you should be allowed to do it.
Actually, pretty interesting. When you ask people,
you should be fired.
In survey data, do you support affirmative action? Do you support race-conscious college admissions? Do you support mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training? They overwhelmingly say no.
That's not true at all.
Political affiliations, all racial
I actually
backgrounds.
just looked up this statistic recently. The latest affirmative action poll, which was from 2018, from Pew Research. Let's see. Actually, it goes based on race. So surprisingly, white people disapprove the most of affirmative action at 57%, Asians at 52%, Hispanics at 39%, and blacks at 29%. So he is actually right in total that 50% disapprove and 33% approve. But
50%
that's not most. That's only half.
50% plus one is a majority. So yeah, it's not a majority, but it also probably depends on how the question is asked. And like a single poll doesn't really get the pulse of the country anyway.
Also, when did this come? Okay, this is 2023, so this is a new poll.
I'd really like not to get bogged down in this poll you're looking at, if that's okay.
Okay. The one I saw from 2018 had most people approving of affirmative action.
Required by virtually all of our major institutions, especially American universities. And so you have this mismatch problem where public sentiment is against it, but all of our institutions and even our public policies are for it. And the question is, well, why is that the case? If we live in a democracy, shouldn't majority sentiment eventually translate into public policy? But the answer is that, in my view, there are concentric rings of influence on these issues. You have the tightest ring, which is the fanatics, the people who are deeply committed to it. They work in it. These are the DEI administrators. These are the critical race theorists. These are the kind of BLM activists, let's say. And then you have another concentric ring of people that say, well, I more or less buy into the premise of this. I want more diversity. I support it. So that, let's say, 30% of the public, maybe a little bit more depending on the issue. But then you have an even larger concentric ring of people who are either neutral, slightly opposed, or even quite opposed to it, that are bullied into submission, and they don't
They've been bullied.
They fear the consequences. And then all of a sudden you have a very large number of people. And so what that does...
So he took the people who were like neutral or ambivalent about it and lumped them in with the people who are, maybe like, oh, I don't know about this, or maybe, I might be a little bit against it, or the people who are totally against it. He lumped those three groups when he was describing it. He lumped that all into one group and called that opposed, even though he himself included people who might be neutral or that would say, oh, I don't know enough about this issue to really form an opinion or whatever. But he lumped those in with the opposed, which is an incorrect way to look at things, even in a hypothetical, because what he's doing here is like a hypothetical, I think.
It's a public opinion environment.
I did find the poll I was thinking of, and it's only for college admissions.
For example,
so that's why.
Policymakers, HR people, civil rights bureaucrats can really run up the score. They can really take more territory. They can impose their point of view as the de facto policy, law, requirement, etc. And that's the kind of environment we live in. The people who care most about it have figured out where the levers of power are. They've gone, in most cases, around the democratic process to impose their will.
Wait, is he suggesting to us that for example, your HR department at your company should be conducting what they do as an HR department based on public opinion? Because I feel like that's what he's suggesting. Yes. And he went around legislation. Is he suggesting that we should be that the government should be micromanaging HR departments via legislation? Because that seems like something that a classical liberal would be against. Because they circumvent the democratic process when they're the HR for Google. Yeah, I don't get to go vote for what HR does at Google. Thanks for describing a fucking company in ostensibly free market economy, dude.
Yep. Even when I worked at Google, they never let me vote on whether we got to do that training
or any other HR matter.
Yeah.
They essentially, as we've seen recently with Harvard, North Carolina, and other universities, they essentially say, hey, we know what we're doing is unpopular. We know what we're doing is likely illegal, unconstitutional. We're going to do it anyway.
What, DEI?
And even if you take us to the Supreme Court, even if you find us in violation of the Constitution.
DEI training is very much not illegal. In fact, the whole point of DEI training is so that you're telling your employees, don't do these things because that's illegal.
Right, that's going to get us sued, even if it's not like a criminal matter. It's still you could still end up in court on a civil case where somebody's suing you. And the point of a civil case is that they take your money, and the job of a corporation is to make money for the shareholders. So it's bad for the shareholders. Even if you win all the cases, you're getting sued all the time. You're fucking paying for lawyers and shit all the time.
Yep.
Harvard came out the same day and said, we're still going to do it. We're just going to do it a little more cautiously, a little more carefully, because this is what we want to do. And so until we're able to change elite opinion, I think that public opinion in this case doesn't actually matter all that much.
When you were at Harvard, was it clear this was going on? Is it obvious? And is it the sense we're doing this because we have to right the wrongs of the past and so forth?
Well, yeah. So my education is a little bit different. I went to, immediately after high school, I went to get my undergraduate degree at Georgetown. And this kind of ideology, I graduated in 2006. this kind of stuff was at the margins. It was already at the fringes. I was actually very much on the left, participated in kind of very left-wing campus politics at the time.
You were?
But it was,
Oh.
I was, yeah. But it was...
There's no money in that.
The kind of left-wing politics that I did in Georgetown at the time was, first and foremost, against the Iraq War, position which I still think I was right on. It was...
But like the thing is, like a couple weeks after the invasion of the Iraq War, that was that popular position, not the leftist position, was that this is a bad fucking idea. Like, this was not some extreme left position.
Kind of working class, worker conditions on campus. It was for, the kind of wages and other services. It was a more traditional...
That sounds a little communist-y. I think he might...
Activism.
He might describe himself as a Marxist.
Right. He a fucking student of Marcuse or whatever.
Full into critical race theory. I don't think race was foregrounded in the same way or using the same concepts. I actually went back to school through the night school program at Harvard to get my master's degree at distance, and finished it, actually as I was doing the CRT reporting. And so I was a non-traditional student, older student, distance student. But yes, the let's say the campus environment, was.
But you weren't on campus. You just said that you were a distance student. So what's the campus environment? How do you know about the campus environment?
Different, and even the academics, the basic orientation of a lot of things was still quite different. Although I would say, in fairness and in all honesty, some of the professors that I had went to great lengths to do things like pairing readings that were basically right and left or point and critique. And so even in some of the social thought surveys, they would say, hey, here's Marx and here's Adam Smith, here's Rawls and here's Nozick.
Adam Smith was a socialist.
For the most part, most honest academics still strive to give their students a wide range of opinion. But you can see just from the absurd administration emails, all of the bureaucrats at a place like Harvard, and I'm sure Georgetown now as well, the bureaucracy in some sense is less tolerant, less open-minded, less rigorous, and more fanatical in pushing ideology. And so it's something that I fought against in public policies to say, hey, wait a minute, why are university administrators imposing ideology not only on students but also on faculty? Administrators should be facilitating open discourse, rigorous.
No, they're the bosses. They're not imposing ideology. They're imposing behavior. They're like, you have to do this as part of your job. It's like they're not there to just do what the professor says. They run the university. That's what administration is. Like, what the fuck is this guy talking about?
Academics, high quality student life, not serving as a kind of enforcers of a political orthodoxy and recruiting students into explicit political activism. That's not the role of the adults on campus. Students should be able to protest. Faculty should be able to protest and publish, all of their points of view. But the administration should be neutral on controversial matters of opinion. This is something that at the University of Chicago, the famous Calvin principles, or the Calvin statement. They said, hey, look, the role of the university as a corporation, as a whole, is to remain neutral unless it's a existential threat to the role of the university. All criticism should be delegated to faculty and students. The individual faculty, the individual student should be the means of dissent. I think that's really wise, and I would love to see. I would love to see more universities getting back to that.
That's a good enough place to stop this. Good news, everybody. We're not going to watch the rest of this during the post game. So, I think the reason I stopped it there is it seems like he's got a fundamental misunderstanding of what the administration at a university is. They're not there to just be some neutral, hand-holdy thing. They run the business. And he even said that they run the business of the university. And sometimes that means that you have to dictate the behavior of the professors. if, for example, we're probably going to watch Peter Boghossian in the post game, and he had said that he was forced out or whatever at I think it was Portland State University, or was it Oregon State? It was a university in Oregon, and I believe it was in Portland. But then after he had resigned, we started hearing stories about how he was being just kind of shitty to the people he worked with. And so it's like, well, is that where the administration was pressuring you about, or were they pressuring you because you didn't share their worldview? I would think that from the standpoint of an administration, if you're being shitty to the other staff, that's much more important, because then you're gonna have a hard time retaining staff if Peter Bogo is yelling at them and calling them an idiot and shit all the time when they're trying to clean his office or whatever, like.
Yeah, that affects the business.
Yeah, so I think that he, there's always going to be conflict between the students, the faculty, and the administration at a university. That's the tale as old as time, right? All the protest movements at the universities in the 60s were some version of, it was a tension between the three. Like you look at it like a triangle, right? Where each end is trying to pull in a different direction, and sometimes they're, because of the nature of a triangle, sometimes they're pulling in a similar direction sort of to the other one, but it's this has always been the way it's been. There's different, the students, there's a lot more students than there are anyone else there. So they could, through sit-ins or whatever, technically shut the university down, and that's their power. The faculty gets to decide how things are taught at the university, and that's their power. And the administration can fire the fucking faculty and kick the students out, and that's their power. And that's always been like a conflict at universities. That's nothing new. And this guy's describing it as if it is something new. And I think he's mostly mad that the teachers or the faculty are being sent to DEI training.
That's certainly what Shermer's mad about.
Right. I think if I don't believe in a hell, but if there was a hell, Michael Shermer would just have to go to the cringiest DEI training programs the world has ever seen, back to back to back to back for fucking eternity. A different one every day. Different levels of cringe, different levels of what they call virtue signaling, just every fucking day, right? That would be his journey through eternity. He wouldn't get his own planet like the Mormons believe. He wouldn't get to fucking take 32 years off and come back as a Thetan like the Scientologists believe. It would just be DEI training. Maybe presented to him by Barbie from the movie. So I don't know. Do you have any finishing thoughts before we close this fucker out?
I mean, just that they're two pieces of shit. So that was difficult to watch. It was just like watching a toilet bowl with two pieces of shit in it.
Well, with that, you want to read the show out?
All right. Thank you for watching. This has been the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do this show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. And we're back to that time now that Dave's in his new studio, which is climate controlled. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that on Patreon at patreon.com/Echoplex. And you can also do that at our merch store, which is eplex.store. And if you'd like to check out our other shows, you can do that at echoplexmedia.com. If you are listening live, stick around for the red light show after the song we're about to play. And if you're not listening live, you should try that out sometime. This is Boomers by Periscope.
You recall a time
can't get enough Echoplex and want to keep the conversation going with the hosts and community when we're not live? Then join our Discord server at discord.me/Echoplex. We have text channels, voice channels, meme repositories, and a whole section of screenshots that we don't even remember where they came from. Come join the Now Space on Discord at discord.me/Echoplex.